Committee in FAO. He comes from a very rich experience in system agriculture and rural development. He actually has a Ph.D. in system agriculture and rural development from Australia. He also, his main industry experience focuses on agriculture productivity enhancement, agroecological systemic analysis and policy formulation, participatory institutional reform, and sustainable agriculture and rural development. He actually is part of many industry working groups and provides his advisory and services to a number of international institutions on issues related to food systems. Welcome, Professor Emadi. And finally, we have Mr. Armin Harutyuang, I hope I pronounced your last name properly, who is a Director of Agricultural Policy Development at the Eurasian Economic Commission. Before joining the Commission, he was a Senior Advisor at the Global Center of Technology, Innovation and Sustainable Development in Singapore, and previously Team Leader Partnerships at International Finance Office at the United Nations in Armenia. He also comes from a very rich experience in international development and also focusing on agriculture policy formulation and development. Mr. Armin, welcome with us today. So before we actually go into the specific regional experiences to shed more light on the experience of each region in terms of regional integration for food security, I would like to start with a general question to our panel, looking into the challenges of food security and the potential of regional integration. So drawing from your experience, from your respective organizations and regions, could you provide examples of successful regional integration initiatives that have positively impacted food security? And I'll start with Prof. Teng.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Dalal. I think the way to answer your question for the ASEAN region, which is a grouping of 10 countries in Southeast Asia, is as follows. First, we have the ASEAN Secretariat, okay, and the ASEAN community, where there's ongoing integration efforts, what they call the 3 ASEAN pillars, ASEAN community pillars, respectively the ASEAN Economic Community, which aims to develop a single integrated market and production base, emphasize those 2. Then there's the ASEAN Political Security Community, APSC, and of course the ASEAN Social Cultural Community, ASCC, under which food security partly comes. So that's one level. But the other level is actually at the level of the ASEAN Secretariat, which coordinates and also tries to integrate many, many activities. You mentioned just now the ASEAN Food Security Information System. That's just one very small activity. The bigger one is at the level of the ministers. We have a grouping called the ASEAN Ministers of Agriculture and Forestry, AMAF. And AMAF itself, has taken initiative. For example, they've endorsed guidelines on food security and nutrition in response to crisis. They've endorsed regional guidelines for sustainable agriculture. And also importantly, guidelines for digitalization in agriculture. So these are some examples of what AMAF does as a ministerial grouping. Then, of course, at a more practical level, you again mentioned we have the vision and strategic plan for ASEAN cooperation in food, agriculture, and forestry. The acronym is SP-FAAET. The current version lasts to 2025. And under these, there are many sectoral plans, crops, animals, including food security. And underpinning this are mechanisms for cooperation and to achieve some level of integration. Very quickly, the FCIS is just one example. We also have an ASEAN Food Security Reserve Board, but more importantly, I think we have a buffer stock for rice. Okay, we have what it's called APTA, the ASEAN +3 Emergency Rice Reserve Scheme, for which individual countries can trigger it and draw if there are any shortfalls in rice. As you know, rice is our most important staple in this region. And then for those in universities, there's also the ASEAN Technical Working Group on Agricultural Research and Development, commonly called ATGARD. This is a very important forum for us to get together, all the research institutions and so on, to actually identify priorities for research. It's ongoing at the moment. Now, the third thing I want to share is that there's also an organization called SEARCA, SEARCA, of which I'm a senior fellow, Southeast Asian Regional Center for research and graduate studies in agriculture. It is the only inter-country agriculture program. And within them, within this entity, they've got different sub-programs, one of which is an umbrella program on food security, which has been decided on by the key universities in this region. So the famous universities, the IPB, Caseta, and so on and so forth, really. So very shortly then, at the level of the community itself, there are three pillars. At the level of ASEAN, we've got the SP, FAAET, and so on. And then at the CIRCA level, CIRCA is in fact supported by the Southeast Asia Minister of Education Organization. So it's both education and research, highlighting in particular graduate research. I'll stop there, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Paul. I think you've addressed a few issues like whether institutional through the various institutions you have mentioned, some governance aspects also through these institutions, and also you spoke about education and research, which are very interesting areas to focus on when looking at regional integration. Now, I would address the question to Mr. Srinivasan, of course, from the multilateral perspective. From your experience, can you list some examples of successful regional integration initiatives? I know Prof. Paul mentioned great initiatives, as I said, from institutional governance, research, and education within ASEAN. What other initiatives, particularly looking at the finance and mobilization side?
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfect.
Basically, I'm Srinivasan Nanchand. I oversee the regional cooperation programs on agriculture and environment at ADB, especially in the GMS, we call Greater Mekong Sub-Region, covering 6 countries. There are 2 provinces of China, Yunnan and Guangxi, and then in addition, there are 5 countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. And first of all, I wish to thank Hamad Bin Khalifa University and also Islamic Organization for Food Security for this invitation to ADB. ADB has been involved in regional cooperation and integration efforts for a long time. And actually, I wanted to cite 3 successful examples from promoting regional cooperation in food security. And Professor Paul has already mentioned about the ASEAN, so I will not touch upon that. Again, as he mentioned, there are so many initiatives at ASEAN level. What I will touch upon, the second one is a subset of that one, the Greater Mekong Sub-Region. This program was actually initiated in 1992 by ADB, of course, in cooperation with all the 6 countries. And so far, we have invested more than $25 billion and also more than 200 technical assistance projects focusing on regional cooperation and integration in multiple sectors. The original idea of this program is to create, first of all, transport corridors across the region, providing connectivity, and then transform the transport corridors into economic corridors. And agriculture is one of the key areas for that transformation. So we have something called GMS Core Agricultural Support Program since 2006. And basically, this program is the one that is supporting all the countries. We are into now 3rd phase of the program. We call it as GMS Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security Program, which has about 6 elements, focusing on greening the agribusiness value chains, financing agribusiness enterprises within the region, and also maintaining crop safety and quality, and also animal health and value chains improvement, and also transformation of GMS agriculture to impacts of climate change, and also looking at water, food, energy, and access issues. Those are the 6 themes that we are doing during this phase. Interestingly, we are also preparing a 2030 strategic framework for transformation of agri-food systems in the GMS. And this is for endorsement by the GMS Ministers of Agriculture sometime in October this year in China. And another initiative that ADB strongly supports is the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program. And that also has some component focusing on agricultural modernization and enhancement of food security. This CAREC 2030 strategy, for example, has many issues focusing on food security. And that also, since its launch of 2001, ADB has invested almost $51 billion. And as part of that CAREC initiative, there is a cooperation framework for agricultural development and food security. And basically, we are looking at, of course, the framework has 6 cross-cutting priorities. One is like innovation and digitalization, protection of environment, climate change adaptation and mitigation, improvement of food safety, private sector development, and also promotion of gender equality. All this is happening basically, the ADB's philosophy for regional cooperation is to support regional partnerships, to generate regional knowledge, and also to catalyze regional finance basically, and to improve regional governance in terms of institutions, and also fostering regional innovations and promoting gender equality in the region. These are some of the key priorities for ADB in terms of regional cooperation and integration. I believe, those are the 2 successful examples that I can cite here. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. I think these are interesting initiatives, and of course, ADB is a very specific profile. MDBs, they have their own mandates, and also they have their key features that allow them to provide support for food security, typically leveraging on their AAA status, and also their member countries in terms of the type of support they can grant. So I would come back when it comes to the financing and of course the sustainability issues and climate change later in the webinar, which are very critical when it comes to achieving food security and also sustainable development from a regional perspective. I will now ask Prof. Hamadi, from your perspective, I know you worked extensively on the OIC region, and if you can also share some examples or initiatives for a successful regional integration that impacted food security in the region.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Dalal, and thanks for having me in this meeting, particularly Islamic Organization for Food Security and Hamad Bin Khalifa University. As you mentioned earlier, actually, my regional background is mainly focused on MENA, or Persian Gulf countries, GCC. According to my understanding and my sort of experience, of course, the Middle East is one of the most top 10 newsmaker in terms of conflict during the last 50 years. And according to this disability, sort of non-stability of the political situation, actually the cooperation is not that strong that we can find it in the Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, and somewhere else, because it's mainly focused on or influenced mainly by political tension and conflicts and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, I can say that the successful or ongoing sort of cooperation in the region are divided on 2 groups of organizations. One, political economic sort of organization, which is a cooperation between the countries, of course, sometimes successful, sometimes not successful, according to the issue of conflict. And of course, we have some professional organization, multilateral professional organization, which I was working with some of them during the last 20 years. Of course, FAO is one of the most famous ones in terms of technical cooperation and professional cooperation, and sometimes in terms of sort of trade and so on. And of course, CGAR, which are scientific sort of organization of United Nations in terms of agricultural production, particularly in terms of grain, rice, like IRI, SIRDAP, and also ICARDA, which are mainly focused on the dried and semi-dried area. This organization made a lot of efforts to bring these countries focusing on the common issues, common problem, and actually agricultural productivity and so on and so forth in terms of technology transfer, sharing knowledge, sharing information, and so on and so forth during the last 50 years. And more or less they were successful. But as I mentioned, unfortunately, because the platform, the political platform in the Near East, and particularly in North Africa and the Near East and Middle East, are not as stable, and we can see during last several months, this cooperation, regional cooperation, always have been under the threat of breaking or actually degrading, which we can see it very carefully. And since the political situation, as we will discuss it later on, impact on that, this was not a stable growing area. But since the climate change is growing, the problem of climate change, then this cooperation based on the common enemy, common threat, common problem, which is mainly geographical based, not ideological, not racial, not language based, and so on, is improving. And that is one of the area and the window for future. Let me finish my talk in this part, in this stage, because it's very complicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Hamad. I know the OIC is a very big region, and there are also differences in terms of the subgroups within the region. So they face different challenges, but they share common challenges as well, as you mentioned. So including water scarcity, climate change, but also the conflicts and all the geopolitical risks you mentioned, and other types of crises, which also impacted the rest of the world. So I think it's very interesting to look at the current initiatives and assess them from the perspective of all of these considerations, and to see how these measures can be strengthened actually to promote food security. So I'll come back later to you with some of these examples in more details. And I want now to turn to Mr. Ahmed. Thanks for joining us. Who comes from the Eurasian Economic Commission. So first of all, I'd like to meet some of the participants in the introduction of the Eurasian Economic Commission and what you're doing. And perhaps also from your perspective, if you can share with us some initiatives from Eurasia on that aim actually or target food security, if you can give some successful examples as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. This is my pleasure, and I'm delighted to join this discussion today. We at the Eurasian Economic Union actually have very high self-sufficiency level in terms of the food. And it's been on average during the last few years, it was around 93%. In other words, we are sufficient with the most of the products and staple food in particular. And the only group of the products that we've been importing is fruits, vegetables, and berries. And even in this area, we see a significant progress. However, it's important to mention that while availability pillar of the food security is successfully implemented within the members of the Eurasian Economic Union, unfortunately, we have several problems that we're facing in terms of the accessibility and affordability of the food of all. And especially considering the negative impact of the COVID-19, our policies at the common level at the Eurasian Economic Union have shifted as well. We have adopted at first the methodology and the common principle of food security, which is basically sets what we understand by the main principles and what are the objectives that we would like to achieve together with the 5 member states, as well within the work with the observing states such as Uzbekistan and Cuba. And what we've been doing, we have designed a methodology of assessment of the food security in the member states, because, you know, the most popular indexes that have been designed, for example, by the Economist, unfortunately misses 2 countries, members of the Eurasian Economic Union, such as Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. And therefore, we've decided that we need to have also a methodology to assess the food security. Then during the pandemic, we actually had a challenge in terms of the supplying the food to the member states. And what we've designed was the emergency group, which is still on, and it's basically brings together deputy ministers of the member states to address the issue of the food security in its member states. And it's basically a mechanism that brings together the high-level decision makers within 1 day to find quick solutions to the request of the member states. We've operated that mechanism and it was successful. Then, of course, that was, I would say, more a generic approach where we design a methodology. We're thinking about the mechanism of supplying an emergency situation. But in the long term, we believe that we need to have a common tools and programs to achieve a better food security for all in the member states. What we've done recently, we have started to initiate an educational programs, and very recent one was on selection and seed production, for example, that brought together 11 educational facilities, the top universities in agriculture and agriculture sciences together. And we're providing these amazing opportunities for students and professors of the member states to join these programs. We think that we will continue that successful programs in terms of the providing opportunity for students and professors to get the best out of these educational programs. We also started to work with the Eurasian Development Bank on designing a better logistics and food traceability system. We've been working on that for 3 years now, and now we are at the stage for formalizing and I would say formulating actually the digital platform of exchange of information between the main logistic centers. It's not mandatory. It's basically a voluntary system that will bring together all logistic services of the members of the Eurasian Economic Union, because after our study, we did recognize that because of the large number of remote areas in the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, the physical accessibility to food has become an important issue. And we believe that with a further development of the logistics center chain, we would manage to address that issue as well. And finally, of course, the innovation component and innovation pillar is critical for us. We've been investing in many different initiatives, including precision agriculture through, for example, educational facilities, reaching the smallest subsistence farmers into the project who does not have that kind of a resources to invest in. And one of the most recent initiative that we've started is also production of the plant-based proteins at some of our facilities. And we're kind of a platform for all member states to further expand that good experience to other member states. That's basically a few examples of the work that we're doing in terms of the building a better regional food security system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is all very interesting and good to know about the initiatives at the Eurasian Economic Union. I think a lot of people do not know much about what's happening in the region, and I think this is a good opportunity to share all of these developments. And it's very interesting because you also brought up the additional issue of logistics and also food traceability. So which is a key important challenge currently in many regions. And that brings me to my next point in the webinar, which is looking at the issues of market access and trade facilitation. And I know this has been a challenge. I think you mentioned the small farmers, the issues of them to, for example, accessing either financing, but also in terms of facilitating market access. And this is a common challenge, I think, globally when it comes to very small farmers. And then, of course, so from your perspective, and I'll continue with you before moving to the other panelists. So what additional, so how do you propose enhancing market access and trade facilitation for agricultural products within a regional context? I think you mentioned some of the initiatives you're already doing, but what additional innovative approaches you think can be employed to streamline trade procedures and promote equitable market access, particularly when it comes to smallholder farmers?
Thank you for your question. At first, I have to mention that one of the key functions of the Eurasian Economic Union is also maintaining free trade agreements. And basically, we've been negotiating with many states, including Vietnam, Singapore, Serbia, Mongolia, Iran, and others. And now we have finalized some of them with, for example, Iran and Vietnam. that been really supportive in terms of the accessing new markets, non-traditional markets, at least for the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union. That was one of the ideas that we need to, as a Eurasian Economic Union, facilitate access to new markets. And we've been successfully doing that. Of course, other than having those kind of a reduction of the tariffs and other trade impediments, we've been working also on the food safety side by means of really working together on harmonizing and approximating the legislation of the member states, at first to ensure a more free trade between member states, but also ensuring that our standards and our procedures are within the best practices. So we also facilitate export to non-member states as well. We've been successfully doing that at the policy level. But when you go to the ground, you're absolutely right about subsistence farmers, that they are too small to access that kind of a global value chains. And what we've been doing and supporting within our work with the Eurasian Development Bank is also stimulating, I would say, institutional setup for the aggregator institutes. I can bring you one of such examples in Armenia, for example, where by means of designing the small storage chain and by means of creating a big aggregator, those small farmers have an access to the small cold storages, where basically their product is accepted, sorted, packaged, supplied to the aggregator, and within our program on the common logistic chain, then these products can flow into the market of the member states, and not only. Of course, the bargaining power is important at this phase, because if you have only one aggregator or cold storages that been maintaining that entire food supply chain, it was difficult. So we brought in also an idea of subsidizing the percentage of the credit provided for the development of the logistics, which been a very new initiative. We've started that basically beginning of this year with an idea to support design and development of the new logistics centers. This is the second pillar. And the third one is, of course, helping smallholder farmers to ensure at first productivity of their production. I brought up one example of the precision agriculture, which help farmers to minimize the use of the fertilizer and other inputs to the point which is mostly needed for different types of the crops. So by means of that, we're optimizing the expenses and also improve the productivity and efficiency of the production. And the next one is also working closely with the farmers to ensure that their products is basically qualified for the export, considering all type of the phytosanitary, veterinary requirements, also requirements by the global chains, such as, for example, global gap, because production is only one side and we need to ensure that all rules, and actually the difficulty is that different non-member states have their own rules, and therefore smallholder farmers need to also have a good understanding what is their target market and what are the requirements for this target market. In other words, let me bring it to the three main pillars. First, to help farmers to optimize expenses and improve their productivity. Second, to ensure that we have this institute of aggregators that can buy and deliver these products to different parts of the world. And the third is also work closely with the farmers to ensure their standards and all type of the requirements, such as vet and phytosanitary, met the requirements of their target markets. This is the example how we work within the Eurasian Economic Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armin. I think this is very interesting, and it's a very specific thing that perhaps requires more attention also in other regions from the policymakers, because some of the initiatives supporting food security not applicable to SMEs because they have their own challenges and own requirements. So that requires a tailor-made, in a way, policies to support them, either accessing markets or promoting innovation. And that's also in line with the climate change challenges in the regions. Now, building on this, I would like to go back to Ms. Prof. Emadi. From the perspective of the OIC, I know you mentioned some of the challenges in the region. So based on what Mr. Armin just mentioned in the context of the Eurasian Economic Union, I think all of these are great measures that can perfectly be replicated in the context of OIC, knowing that the agriculture sector is the largest sector in the region, and also that SMEs represent a large percentage in a number of countries from privately registered companies. So what do you think, what steps do you think can be implemented at the OIC level in terms of regional integration to improve, for example, market access, trade facilitation, and also to support SMEs for actually strengthening food security? Prof. Emadi, I think you're muted.
Sorry for that. Actually, as you mentioned, the issue of small, medium farmers in the region is much more serious than the other countries. It's really near to the Central American situation. Almost 85% of the total land and resources for agriculture belong to them, and the agricultural productivity, production, and overall sort of availability of food for food security is in the hand of farmers. And in the other hand, the same farmers are part of the poor and hungry people. That is one of the major issues in the Near East and Middle East. The major point that we can say is about how to clustering, how to make the accessibility of the small, medium farmers to inputs, agricultural inputs, and the market, as you mentioned, and finance, and more important than all of these are technology. What we call it, not advanced technology, but appropriate technology. A technology can solve the problem of a small, medium farmers in such a way to improve and enhance their productivity and production, to feed the other part of the community, and with the money that they gain, they can actually solve the problem of hunger and poverty among the 85% of the farmers on the region. Therefore, this is a very serious issue, old issue. Since Second World War, even in the time of Green Revolution, this problem have not been addressed. But what we can see, according to some of the experience that we can see in the Near East and Middle East, is contract farming is one of the solutions that actually can improve the situation and actually solve the problem. I saw it in some Near East by my own, and I'm in Turkey, and I can see it in the south of Turkey. I had a field trip that this contract farming, grouping the farmers, the small, medium farmers, family farmers together, and put them as a part of the chain, a chain of production, a chain that they distribute the technology, the money, the finance, the market, and they can actually sell their products. This type of new format, which is the innovation on cooperation. I call it innovation on cooperation. Not only we need innovation as a technology, not only we need cooperation and cooperative type of new type of cooperative, but also we need an innovation in cooperation and cooperation for innovation. And that would actually accelerate the process and bring the better context and platform for the small, medium farmers to be part of the new sort of platform of food security. And in the one hand, we have two targets with one stone. One, to improve and enhance the productivity, production. And in the other hand, we can actually help the farmers to be out of poverty and hunger, which is one of the major group and category of the population in the region, in the Near East and actually North Africa, engaged with the poverty. That is the very fresh type of result that I can get either in Iran or in Iraq, which I visited last year, and in Turkey, which I'm now visiting to find out the new solutions, emerging solution, but not the final one. One of the major ones that can help a small, medium farmers to be part of the chain, in value chain, in supply chain, and more important, to get the appropriate technology which solve the problem and enhance their productivity.
Thank you, Prof. Emadi. I think definitely technological developments, as you mentioned last is very critical, and we see a lot of development. So we'll discuss later more about some of the initiatives in terms of technological development. And I think Mr. Armin already mentioned some examples when it comes to facilitating logistics or even traceability of trade. And now I would like to go back to Mr. Srinivasan from the perspective of IDB. I know we spoke briefly about a key challenge also, which is climate change, and also that there is an interconnectedness between climate change and food systems. So how do you perceive the role of regional integration in building resilience to climate shocks, and then ensuring food security for vulnerable communities, and also taking into consideration, of course, these challenges of trade facilitation, etc., to enhance food security?
Yeah, thank you. ADB, I mean, as you rightly mentioned, climate change is a sort of a serious threat to all over the world, but more so in Southeast Asia. It is a global challenge, and agriculture is one of the sectors that is most vulnerable to impacts of climate change. And within region, Southeast Asia is also one of the most vulnerable regions to impacts of climate change. If we don't address it properly, it is expected. An ADB study revealed that we may lose as much as 17% of GDP. And even in terms of agricultural productivity itself, rice yields can be almost 50% drop if there are no technological breakthroughs. So the question is that because the region is so dependent on rice and other crops which are most vulnerable to impacts of climate change, and also because it's a global issue, regional cooperation is very critical. ADB is investing almost like a $3.7 billion per year on food security issues. And of that, about 10, I mean, it's not very high, but about 10-12% is focusing on regional cooperation investments related. So our main focus through this support is to promote more South-South exchange of climate resilient agriculture or climate smart agriculture practices. We are establishing like a policy platforms on climate smart agriculture. So at a bank-wide, as I mentioned, I'm chairing the Climate Smart Agriculture Working Group. And our intention is to have these regional policy platforms, and basically they come up with the strategic frameworks which are endorsed by the ministers. And we are also looking at how best we can have a regional approach for the intellectual property rights on climate resilient technologies also. And when we are defining climate resilience, we are talking in a multi-faceted manner. We are not talking purely about agricultural infrastructure resilience. We are also looking at the resilience of the institutions and resilience of the social networks or community resilience. And we are also looking at the financial resilience. So we are looking at the holistic resilience, covering institutions, and also the financing, as well as communities, and also infrastructure. Traditionally, it used to be mainly infrastructure. And we are also trying to help many regional agricultural research and training programs. As Professor Paul mentioned, Sharka and other regional initiative or Asian Institute of Technology, etc. We are supporting such agricultural research and training, mainly to facilitate development of more appropriate technologies for the region. And we are also looking at the sort of support for the regional market information services to enhance awareness among the producers and also traders of the market opportunities in neighboring countries. So the support that we are providing is holistic. But the important thing is that the challenges are still many in terms of whether it is the tariff and non-tariff related trade barriers, or even harmonization of and mutual recognition of standards, etc. So more work needs to be done to address those problems. And in terms of the climate change itself, we believe that the transboundary climate risks are going to be more and more severe, especially in relation to, for example, water and energy, etc. So this is another new area. How do we address transboundary climate risks across the region in the GMS or Southeast Asia? That is another area of focus that we are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. I think these are interesting thoughts. I'll come back to you later about the financing challenges, although we had an extensive discussion in the previous webinar about sustainable agriculture financing, but just very briefly on some aspects, also for the benefit of our participants who haven't attended the previous webinar. But I would like to build on or elaborate on the last point you mentioned about research and innovation. And I would like to go back to Professor Teng to, from your perspective, I know you have a very rich experience also in research and academia. And from your perspective and building on what Mr. Srinivasan had just said, and also Mr. Armin mentioned some initiatives in terms of supporting universities and research, what strategy do you recommend for enhancing regional cooperation in research and innovation? We spoke about, for example, strengthening resiliency when it comes to, let's say, in some of the regions, crop varieties, farming practices. We have issues with regards to, for example, biological diseases, etc. And in addition to environmental challenges that differ between regions. So where do you see, for example, or what strategies do you recommend in terms of enhancing regional cooperation, research and innovation to address all of these challenges?
You know, Dalal, I think the previous speakers or panelists have really raised a host of very interesting questions that relate to the answer I'm going to give you. But let me just first say that, you know, I think underpinning all our efforts, the integration and so on, really is the small farmer. And I'm really happy that Armin and Mahdi brought this up. You take Southeast Asia, for example, you know, we have over 100 million smallholder farmers, okay? So when you talk in terms of context for research, R&D, you really have to ask yourselves the question, which group of smallholder farmers are you aiming at? Right? We know that roughly 60% of our smallholder farmers have subsistence. Okay, the other kind of percentages are so-called progressive smallholder farmers and also advanced smallholder farmers. So things like precision farming, you know, I mean, we've tried for years now to get precision farming to subsistence farmers. Okay? And despite the best efforts, it's so difficult to do so. We've got lots of good science, but the translation of the science into simple technologies that are affordable and practical is a real challenge in Southeast Asia. In particular, with Southeast Asian, you know, the kind of the so-called poorest of the poor, as the International Rice Research Institute would say. By the way, I used to be a scientist at Erie. Okay, so I've plumbed a lot of rice fields. And in Southeast Asia, we can't tackle food security unless you tackle rice. So I really like what Srinivasan was alluding to earlier about rice. It's such a key crop here, right? So back to your question about strategies, though. What is important is that we come up with common agreements on what are the major problem areas that lend themselves to a collective effort. Because every country has its priorities. The challenge is how do we leverage on the individual strengths of national programs to come up with solutions that can address the most number of farmers in the shortest time. Then, of course, the funding comes in. That's where ADB will fortunately Asian Development Bank in our region, apart from other initiatives are happening here. And the thing is that, you know, the answer to your question too also brings in issues like climate change. Like here in this part of the world, you know, Vietnam announced they're going to have 1 million hectares of decarbonized low carbon rice, basically, by 2030. Now, that requires a lot of R&D. And I like this thing about, you know, transboundary, you know, issues and so on. It definitely is a transboundary issue. So amongst the kind of the thinking that goes into the strategy is to ask the question, what lends themselves to collaboration between countries with a common problem set? Okay. Now, fortunately, in the ASEAN region, we've got a lot of mechanisms that allow us to do that. And I mentioned earlier one of them called ATW GUARD, which is the ASEAN Technical Working Group on Ag Research and Development. So through that forum, there's been a lot of discussions. Okay, for example, on decarbonizing rice, what do we do? And at the same time, also ask the question, how do you improve the livelihood of small farmers? Because it senses actually to talk about too much R&D, unless in the end we benefit the small farmer. So here we're very practical in that sense in this region. We always start with the problem statements and then work backwards and say, what do we have to do? Okay, what kind of collaborative mechanism do we need? in some cases, like you take some of the ASEAN countries, some of the national systems are in fact very advanced in just agricultural research, and they can in fact help others. Which brings me to another point. Even though we can have grand strategies, we always have to recognize the fact that even amongst the 10 countries in ASEAN, and this was alluded to by Srini again, they're not all equal. Not in terms of their GDP per capita, in terms of the research capabilities. So we have to, in fact, segment those countries, like has been done with the Greater Mekong Sub-Region project, and recognize that, hey, there are capability differences. If you don't recognize the reality, you're not going to get collaboration going. Of course, the other issue is funding. Again, we've got a whole range of countries here in Southeast Asia, some of which are relatively, I think, well financed nationally, and therefore have the means to collaborate with other countries. Others don't. Others are going to require external financing, which is why I think we're also fortunate in this region that we've got some major, I think, donor agencies here, apart from the World Bank, the ADB, also like GIZ is here, USAID, the Australians, all have projects in this region, which really help us to bring together the cementing, in other words, the glue that ties countries together to work on specific problems. So there's no simple answer to your question. It's actually a very big question. I think I'll stop there and go on and on this question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Paul. I think it's definitely a big question, and there is a lot to leverage on. But the good thing is we have good initiatives globally to leverage on. And as Amy mentioned, I know we had a debate about whether we call it regional integration or cooperation. It's actually definitely regional integration can only be facilitated through more collaboration and cooperation, and that's what needs to be strengthened. And I would like to continue with you, Prof. Paul, and moving to the next theme of this webinar, which is looking at issues of policies, governance, and innovation. And we spoke briefly, I think Mr. Arman spoke earlier about innovation when talking, for example, about digital platforms to ensure food traceability, or looking into even some issues of precision agriculture, etc. So in the context of regional integration for food security, how do you see the role of emerging technologies, such as, for example, biotechnology, digital agriculture, in enhancing agricultural productivity and resilience across borders? And how, of course, building on what you mentioned earlier in terms of collaboration and cooperation in research, how can that also facilitate this objective in collaboration with the national governments and international institutions? Sure.
Well, let me just perhaps qualify, first. You used the term emerging technologies. I tend to use the term disruptive technologies. Okay, what we really need right now to ensure sustainable food security in agriculture are really some disruptive technologies. Biotechnology is one example. Not so much the older biotechnology, like GMOs, but the newer ones, like gene editing, for example, and also the gene editing plus, okay, which the private sector is very advanced in. So disruptive technology number one is the new biotechnology, very key. And Ismail knows this very well. This goes beyond GMOs, right? Now, in order to have that, you've got to have the policy frameworks in place, number one. And secondly, you've got to have the biosafety frameworks in place in countries. Now, unfortunately, in Southeast Asia, our policy frameworks are still not that strong for biotechnology. I'll be very candid here. We've got a couple of countries that are very strong and very pro-biotech in all respects, all the way ranging from genetic engineering to basically gene editing. The second big disruptive technology, as you already pointed out, in fact, is digital technology, which is why our ASEAN ministers have actually recognized that, AMAF, through the regional guidelines on how to accelerate the adoption of digital technology into farming. Again, with the aim of assuring food security, improving livelihoods, also improving competitiveness in agriculture. Plus, of course, resisting climate change and so on. So all these are very key, but central to that, again, is policy. Okay? Without the policy imperatives stated and articulated by governments, nothing really moves. Because with the exception of two countries, we're still pretty much a developing region in Southeast Asia. In developing regions, policy imperatives are key to unlock funding, unlock support in itself. We've learned it the hard way. Now, there are several other disruptive technologies, one of which is actually very key to climate change. The third one, I call it novel environments for farming, agriculture. What do I mean by novel environments? Novel environments include, for example, indoor vertical farms, okay? What we call plant factories. Okay? Now, this is actually a prelude to what is emerging now as a major trend around the world in response to climate change. Climate enable agriculture, okay, or climate-friendly agriculture, control environment agriculture, they're all different terms of the same thing, where you buffer your growing of the crops from the outside external environment. CA is growing very fast in the Asia region, also in Southeast Asia. To give a quick example, in Asia now, we have over 500 of these large plant factories that are totally controlled, growing mainly vegetables. Also fish, indoor fish farming, stacked up trays and so on. So normal environments, in fact, the third normal environment is growing rice in the sea. Okay, and the private sector is actually getting into that now. And because by doing that, you have two advantages. One is that there's no methane release. As we all know, rice is the biggest emitter of methane in Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, we can't tackle greenhouse gases unless we tackle rice. Okay? So by growing rice in the ocean, you actually reduce any potential for methane emission. Very key indeed. So that's novel environments. Now, the last one I want to mention very quickly again here is something that Armin referred to, novel food. In novel food, there are 4 categories there: plant-based protein, cultivated meat, microbial protein, also insect protein. We now have some very significant insect protein factories now here in Southeast Asia, producing not so much human food, but animal feed and pet food. Okay, basically main means of protein itself, yeah. But all that can't happen without two important, actually 3 very important enablers: policy, financing, infrastructure. Very key. Okay, and if you go back, in fact, to the role of the World Bank and ADB, we're now seeing the emergence of new needs for infrastructure development. Very much like after the Second World War, when the World Bank came to Asia and loaned large amounts of money to build irrigation systems, which is why we've got rice bowl areas now in Southeast Asia. Malaysia is a good example. But the Malaysian Mada area is actually a World Bank financed irrigation scheme, which is the main rice producing area. So again, emerging technology is very important. In fact, in my book, you read about 8 emerging technologies, or what I call disruptive technologies. They're going to be changing the face of agriculture in the coming years. 8 of them. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Prof. Paul, and
Yeah,
definitely, I think your book is very insightful, and I invite actually the participants to have a look at it to get more insight on these 8 technologies. I think you mentioned 3 points, which actually summarize in a way the developments, but also the challenges currently in terms of strengthening regional integration of food security, which is policy, financing, and infrastructure. And we spoke a bit about the infrastructure, being it market access or in terms of facilitating trade. Policy aspect, I think we mentioned some of the measures, and we'll continue with that with other panelists. But I would like to go back to Mr. Srinivasan to talk a bit about the financing aspect. Of course, ADB is a regional development institution, and which focuses on supporting member countries in a variety of ways through technical assistance, but also through financing. So how do you propose integrating innovative financing mechanisms into regional policy frameworks to mobilize resources and accelerate the adoption of climate resilient agriculture practices?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as I mentioned, ADB is an international financial institution in the region. And last year, for example, we provided around $24 billion in addition to, from its own resources. And in addition to the co-financing of around $12 billion, total around $36 billion. And ADB also would like to be known as the sort of climate bank of the Asia Pacific. That is the ambition we are aiming. And our president has committed $100 billion of own financing between 2019 and 2030 to address climate change adaptation and mitigation. And especially in terms of adaptation, of course, agriculture is one of the priority sectors that we are paying much attention to. As I earlier mentioned, around 3.7, ADB has made a food security commitment of $14 billion over 4 years. And so out of that, again, around 10 to 12% is mainly focusing on regional cooperation and regional investment frameworks. In case of Greater Mekong sub-region, how we do it is basically we develop a regional investment framework in agriculture And of course, it's not only for agriculture, but also other sectors. So we call it as a RIF, Regional Investment Framework. And we identify the projects every year and based on the inputs from various countries. And we have the GMS working group on agriculture, for example. They will be asked to ask the colleagues of other governments, to propose projects that are regional in scope. When we say regional, at least 2 countries need to commit to that project. So that is the minimum criterion. So every year, the working group on agriculture, GMS working group on agriculture, provides a list of investment projects that need attention from not only from ADB, but also from other development partners and private sector. So the GMS Regional Investment Framework or CAREC Regional Investment Framework or some other sub-regions also. This is the fundamental mechanism how we look at the financing issues. And also the thing is that the strategies when we get them endorsed by the GMS Ministers of Agriculture, so they identify what type of technical assistance is required for regional cooperation, what type of investments are required. I can give 2 or 3 examples. One is the GMS Climate Friendly Agribusiness Value Chain Sector Project. It is covered, basically it has same components in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. These are the relatively low-income countries within the GMS. So how best can they cooperate within the agribusinesses along the GMS transport corridors, actually? How do we improve agricultural competitiveness of these transport corridors in terms of agricultural commercialization, etc.? And there is another one, GMS Cross-Border Livestock Health and Value Chains Improvement. The transboundary animal diseases are a major problem, and also animal to human diseases called zoonosis. That is also a major problem. And also use of antimicrobials is a major problem in either poultry or livestock and other things, which has impacts on human health. So we are looking at the regional cooperation on one health, human health, environmental health, and also animal health. How best we can really integrate these concerns and promote regional cooperation. So this GMS Cross-Border Livestock Health and Value Chains Improvement Project, although is being implemented in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, but it has wider implications for China, Vietnam, and also Thailand. China is the major importer of the livestock from this region. So that is why. And to enable this, actually, one of the fundamental things, because the regional cooperation projects are not sometimes high priority projects for countries. So they want more in-country investments. However, we want to provide concessional finance. We have something called Asian Development Fund that provides a concessional fund. And we also mobilize concessional finance from the Global Environment Facility, or more importantly, from the Green Climate Fund. The one that I mentioned, the Climate Friendly Agribusiness Value Chains Project in the GMS, that mobilized about $40 million grant from the GCF, Green Climate Fund. And similarly, we are looking at even the cross-border livestock health also. It mobilizes many concessional finance from our ADF 13. And we are also designing more funding mechanisms that are preferentially supporting regional cooperation projects. For example, one is a community resilience partnership program. Again, agricultural communities are most vulnerable. Again, what type of regional cooperation initiatives can help the coastal communities dependent on mangroves and sort of fish, etc. Or even the freshwater dependent communities or forest dependent communities. How best can we collaborate regionally? And again, this community resilience partnership program also will preferentially support some of the regional cooperation projects. And more importantly, we are looking at the opportunities for the blended finance. We believe that the governments alone cannot fund all the projects, or even us. It is the private sector and other development partners that need to participate in supporting these regional cooperation projects. And that is why we have the development partners roundtable, private sector roundtable, and then we present these regional cooperation projects to them. and then see their interest, how best we can collaborate. I mean, whether it is AFD, JICA, multiple, both bilateral and multilateral, EFAD, World Food Program, and others. So we try to look at those opportunities for encouraging the regional cooperation in terms of financing. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. I mean, our intention is also to develop innovative financial instruments, whether it is, crop insurance, livestock insurance, or catastrophic risk insurance, that type of financing instruments also, which can be applicable all over the region. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. I think this we had an extensive discussion in the previous webinar about sustainable agriculture financing, and effectively we discussed issues like blended finance, but also we see a very vibrant and deep, for example, green bonds and green sukuk market, which has the potential to also mitigate this financing gap. And also we discussed some of the initiatives when it comes to mobilizing financing for SMEs in the agriculture sector. So definitely MDBs play a critical role in this regard because, as you clearly said, it's because of their preferred creditor status and their AAA rating. So they have more flexibility in terms of mobilizing financing for member countries. I would like to build on this and go back to Professor Emadi. I think Mr. Srinivasan definitely spoke about MDBs. I think particularly looking at the role of ADB and some of the initiatives. But from your perspective, I also know that you have a very rich experience working with also multilaterals and international institutions, like, for example, the FAO. What do you see, what role do you see multilateral institutions can play in fostering cooperation among nations to address food security challenges at a regional level? And how can these institutions leverage their resources, their expertise, and networks to promote, for example, policy harmonization, joint initiatives, knowledge exchange in order to enhance resilience and agricultural productivity?
Thank you very much. Actually, in detail, express all this sort of capacity and possibility in the chapter of the book that I will forward it to you. But in a very, very short, how can I say is actually the major role of the multilateral, international, particularly United Nations organization are connectivity and cooperation and give a rich picture of future for the member countries in such a way to enabling them by mutual learning from each other. The time is past that FAO was a messenger of God and give the technology to the third world countries. Now, private sector all over the world have the better technology, much advanced technology in all aspects. That's why the role of United Nations become much more in terms of facilitation of connectivity and connection in such a world that the conflict and climate change put the countries face to face and make the conflict more than before. Therefore, the role of United Nations become like a platform for peace, platform for dialogue, platform for mutual learning, platform for facilitation of learning from each other and looking at the rich picture of future, which is very dark, unfortunately, in terms of conflict and in terms of climate change, particularly in the Middle East, Near East, and North Africa. That's my suggestion, actually, in that book chapter about food security is that the role of United Nations organization that I was working, including FAO, WFP, IFAD, and all other sort of organizations which work on the food, is to bring this platform for the members countries to look at their situation in such a way to finish with the NFSP, which is National Food Security Plan, Policy, or Strategy, whatever you name it. And I did it actually after finishing my role as ambassador. I came to Iran and pushed the minister, pushed the deputy minister and the political system. And after 1.5 years, we come up with the food security plan, National Food Security Plan. It's not just a plan, it's a sort of homework that all partners come together to see the situation in the future and redefine the food security, because what is very important is that food security these days is not the food security meaning that we had in 1960s, 1970s. The whole definition of food security with 5 different pillars and principles already changed. Therefore, we need to redefine the food security. What is food security and what is the principle of food security? The second is to evaluate the current situation of the country, because as my colleagues mentioned, food security for each nation, each country is different from each other, because the context, the situation, the potential, the possibility, the threat are different. It was exactly what I did after finishing the food security, National Food Security Plan in Iran for the GCC countries. I had a meeting 3 weeks ago with the GCC countries, and Oman and Emirates started actually thinking about that. I said, without having a plan for food security, you cannot do anything. And this plan is not a plan like a blueprint. This plan is a homework for the whole possible partner and sort of people who are in the team to come together and think in integrated, comprehensive way, not in the silage way of thinking, not in the reductionist way of thinking. That's actually a learning process in such a way that they can see the future, the threat, and in this framework, of course, they can prepare a good policy, as my friend and Professor Paul mentioned. Without policy, we cannot go anything, particularly when we face with the conflict in the region, which is very, very intensive, and climate change, which is much more influential than any other part of the world. Therefore, with these 2 very important and very influential factors, we need to think where we are going to go, and what is the potential that we can get from all other possible resources, from international organization, United Nations organization, regional organization, and so on and so forth. With this way of thinking, my belief is that the region which are under conflict will find the major real enemy is climate change and future. Therefore, they will think about how to do the cooperation than to do the competition, negative competition, lose way again. That's why I think this homework, the producing or preparation of national food security plan, would be a good sort of startup and homework for rethinking about the definition of food security, the pathway for future, and of course, how can we work together to come up with this situation? That's the very important role of United Nations. This is not in multilateral or bilateral. It needs a role of facilitation by the United Nations, by the blue color of the flag of the United Nations. That would be a good starting point for bringing the region together and thinking about current situation, future, and the problems and the way out of this problem.
Thank you very much.
I did my best to make it short.
Thank you very much, Prof. Emadi. These are a lot of definitely areas that definitely require attention and more coordination. And I would like to build on this. I would like to go back to Mr. Armin. We spoke about, the financing perspective, the institutional, the governance, and I would like to focus maybe, from your experience at the Eurasian Economic Union, what strategies do you recommend for enhancing policy coherence and regulatory frameworks to facilitate seamless trade in agricultural products while safeguarding food safety standards and promoting equitable access to markets? I think you spoke about smallholder farmers, but if you can elaborate more from the policy perspective and regulatory perspective on how to, achieve food security.
Thank you. In general, most part of our work is about legislation. What we do is our primary function is to ensure harmonizing legislation so there is no issue in terms of the trade between member states. Simultaneously, as I've mentioned, our policies also targeted on different components of the food security. For example, we all do understand that the quality of the product and the safety of the product is also a tiny but an important part of the food security in general. So the rules and regulation harmonized under the roof of the Eurasian Economic Commission is targeted that everyone understand, invest in necessary facilities and infrastructure to ensure that standards and ensure that safety within the Eurasian Economic Union is respected. But let me jump onto the previous discussion as well, because I think my colleagues mentioned that it's one side is about creating a necessary legislation and regulatory framework. But on the other hand, considering the remark of the previous speaker about the technologies and about the engagement of the private sector, just because they carry the most, I would say, advanced knowledge and technologies. What we've done in my previous position in Singapore, I think was a good illustration how to bring in business, smallholder farms, and other stakeholders to really address the issues of food security in a more, I would say, innovative ways. One of the projects that we have conducted during that period of time was the project called Cultivate, which brought together 12 countries of Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. They worked together with the private sector, with the larger businesses, to address some specific issues, say, of productivity, or some specific issues of addressing the little efficiency on the farm level. And the private sector companies were interested to invest into the innovative solution provided by the startup community. So what we've done, basically, we have created two programs. One was the acceleration program that finally brought together 24 companies, startups from around the world to address those challenges, which were funded by the private sector. And the second were hackathons, when we were more, I would say, we're finding some digital solutions in partnership with the Microsoft. So the entire program was funded by the Microsoft. Microsoft was interested not only from the perspective of the food security, but their objective was, I would say, some corporate social responsibility program in terms of the ensuring better sustainability of the production. But with an Accelerate, it was with a Cultivate program, with an acceleration program, it was really interesting test of how to address the issue of the small farmer by engaging startup community and by bringing in funding from the private sector that is interested to address those issues because they're final beneficiary of that particular product. In this case, of course, we saw a little engagement of the government, and it was good because, as my colleagues mentioned, the private sector sometimes have to take that leadership role in terms of that, not only apply those technologies at their large production facilities, but also in helping finding the best solution to the smallholder farms. That was a very unique example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amin. This is a very insightful example, and I believe all the examples you shared today are definitely good case studies to leverage on for the other regions. And we hope that through this webinar, we can actually initiate future collaboration and cooperation among regions and also to scale up all of these initiatives. I think the discussion is so interesting and we can go on with more questions, but unfortunately, I think the time is the limit. And I would like to give one minute for each of the panelists. Just if you were to think about maybe 3 key action areas that policymakers and government should focus on to strengthen regional integration for food security, what would you suggest? And I would start perhaps with Professor Teng.
Sure. Just very quickly, I think I would like to at least share 3 what I call underpinnings. These are kind of paradigms, I think, that have to underpin whatever we try to do. First is that I think we need to recognize that one country's food security really depends on regional food security. We're not islands anymore, so to speak. Okay. Second is that trade is essential. No country really has the comparative advantage to tackle all aspects of food security. We need trade. Okay. Third, really, in this way, I think paraphrasing Prof. Mahdi, I think national preparedness plans are so important. And they have got to be action in such a way that there's no single agency in the country that has ownership. It's going to be a multi-agency. Like in Singapore, we have the Inter-Ministry Committee on Food Security, chaired by a very top-level civil servant, to bring in all the support that's needed. So those are 3 points I want to leave behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Paul, and I'll turn to Prof. Emadi.
Let me actually say the same things that I mentioned, also Professor Paul mentioned. The first and most important thing I think is the 1,000 island way of thinking is finished, and we need to think about regional food security, at least not global, because it's still maybe soon, but regional food security. And the most important thing is which region, not ideological region, not Islamic region, not Arabic region, not Persian Gulf region, but also a region, geographical region, which are interconnected naturally. Therefore, they are dictated by the geography. Therefore, they need to follow the geography and work together. The second thing, of course, as my colleagues also mentioned, is considering private sector serious. The time that the government can do everything and can think about everything is finished. And third one is rethinking about food security, and for policy formulation for food security is very, very important in such a way to rethinking about the meaning, the definition, and the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Emadi, and Mr. Srinivasan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think most of the important points have been covered by Professor Paul and Professor Emadi. I think increasingly, although we have not really addressed as part of this particular webinar, I think the need for reducing the food loss and waste across the value chain is going to be very critical. Actually, because even if we produce a lot, I mean, if we continue to waste, it's not going to solve the food security issue. I think what type of innovative mechanisms we can address in terms of reducing the food losses and waste is important. Second is, as Professor Paul has mentioned already, in terms of the technologies. I mean, it is not only the pure production-oriented technologies, it is actually even fintech. This is something that we have not, in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of, bringing trade benefits to the smallholder farmers, or even for SMEs, financing, etc. So there are a lot of advances happening on fintech and, powered by artificial intelligence, etc. So if we really want to ensure that the regional benefits are coming to smallholder farmers, we need to do more on the fintech also in agriculture. The third and final point is, I mean, being a financial institution, I mean, we believe that still our investments in agricultural research are extremely low, and especially on regional cooperation is very, very low. So it's the first we need to enhance the investments on agricultural research and development, because it's only a declining trend, except in a few countries. And even international financial institutions also, like ADB and others, should support how best we can really produce food in an environment-friendly manner, while all the expectations are that the climate change is going to drastically reduce the yields, while there is also an increase in the population. So again, I would like to see, I mean, I want to believe on this indoor controlled environment technologies, but I'm not sure whether it will be able to meet all the demands of the volume that is required. Maybe for high value crops or those things, it may be okay. But, I mean, still growing rice in sea is a far-fetching in terms of, who owns the sea and all those things. I mean, even simple. So there are many considerations. My wish is that more finance goes into agricultural research and development to bring out more innovative technologies, both on field and also indoors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. And these are definitely very good ideas for our future webinars, and we will definitely look into them. And last but not least, Mr. Armin.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. At first, I'd like to thank you for an excellent moderation of this webinar. It was my pleasure to join it again. My three would be: number one is partnership. My colleagues mentioned the international organization, government, private sector, startup community, and others. I think these kind of a collaboration and partnership can bring together different views on different issues. As a result, we may find better solutions to the food security. And partnership also on the regional and global level, obviously. The second is promoting innovation targeted on optimizing cost, improving efficiency, and ensuring sustainability. And the third one, I would say, infrastructure, just because we've seen how infrastructure was important when we faced the COVID-19, and some of the countries had serious difficulties in terms of the physically moving goods from one point to another point. And it's about agriculture, food security, and also non-agriculture goods. So that would be my three pillars: partnership, innovation, and infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armin, and thank you everyone for your very insightful remarks. I think definitely a lot of interesting ideas and case studies and best practices have been shared in today's session, and hopefully this will support policymakers in other regions to consider them and also to scale up their collaboration and coordination efforts. I think we spoke about policy, financing, we spoke about infrastructure, and that is true also innovation and promoting market infrastructure that promotes trade, but also market access, digitalization, and also taking into consideration the effects of climate change by integrating, also sustainability considerations. I think all of these are very important areas to consider, and obviously this cannot be achieved without partnerships and more, coordination and cooperation between regions and, of course, within the regions themselves. I would like to thank again all the panelists, Professor Teng, Mr. Srinivasan, Professor Emadi, and Mr. Armin. Thank you so much for your valuable insights. And I look forward to obviously interacting with you in other initiatives in future. Thank you very much for all the participants. Stay tuned. We do have more webinars in the pipeline, which will be announced through the IOFS and HBKU platforms. And we will continue this market awareness through our webinar series on all of these important issues. Thank you again for the co-founders, to IOFS for their support, to Qatar National Research Fund, HBKU, and Ministry of Municipality for all their continued efforts, and also to my dear colleagues, Professor Giridini, Eudele, Adia, and Osman also for their support for making this a successful webinar. And of course, the valuable support of my dear colleague from IOFS, Mr. Azamat, for coordinating all of this. And Dr. Ismail, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. I'm sorry for that, for interruption. This is unfortunate time that, we have to close, because yes, I was really entertaining and I was very happy, for all. I have to thank you from all my deep of my heart. I really learned a lot, only 1.5 hours. And now, it's like, it was entertaining and like we are in a field with a lot of fruits. Thank you for Dr. Dalal. Thank you all our eminent and the elite professors, panelists. You really add to us a lot, and we hope that we can really distribute this webinar all over our region. Thank you very much from the deep of our heart here. It was wonderful time, 1.5 hours. Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal. Sorry for interruption.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for future webinars. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you and assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Sağ olun size de.